Conas taoi. Welcome back to the Candlelit Tales podcast, where we tell Irish myths set to original music. My name is Aaron and I'm one half of the storytelling duo that makes up Candlelit Tales. And in this episode we continue our Fianna series, aka the Fianna Saga, with Fionn and the Phantoms. This one's a gross and gory story, so just FYI, it gets a bit gross. Now, to listen back to our reflections and our chats and to support this podcast, you can join our Candlelit crew by following the links in the description below. But for now, here, Sorka, tell us a story, will you?
Now that there was a new cohort, and one of them his son, Fionn took a special interest in the younger members of the Fianna. Most of them were no trouble to him. Diarmid was shaping up to be a fine warrior. Naoise, although changeable, was a reliable warrior when she was in the form for it, and a great poet otherwise. Oisín. He wasn't sure he could look at Oisín with an objective eye. He saw too much of his mother in him. Maclúgad. His aunt's son. Maclúgad was inclined to be prideful, boastful, quarrelsome. And Fionn found himself often taking the young man aside for a word, reminding him that the Fianna, although he was part of the Fianna, although he was in the Fianna, this was a group that had to take care of each other. And this way he had, setting himself against people, it would do him no good in the long run. He remembered, to Maclúgad, a man named Fionn, who'd been a wonderful member of the Fianna. Wonderful hunter, wonderful warrior, first in every hunt, head of the line in every battle. But Fionn had not been able to get along with the rest of the Fianna. And so in time, in spite of his great skill, he had to leave. And it was still a grief to Fionn that he had. And so he told Maclúgad this story by way of a warning, and also to remind himself. This thing that he was captain of, although it felt solid now, although it felt rooted into the ground like an oak tree, it was still, in the scheme of things, new and fragile, and he had to tend it. He always had to tend it. So one day, there was a fair in Munster, a horse fair, and Fionn decided to go, not as captain of the Fianna, but just as himself. And he asked Oisín to come with him, and after thinking about it for a moment, he asked Maclúgad to come too. His thought being that the young man might need to see kindness before he understood how to be kind. So the three of them made the journey. And of course, even though he wasn't acting as Fionn of the Fianna, he wasn't dressed for battle, he was still Fionn McCool, and so there was a great welcome for the three of them in Munster. Fionn and his family, Fionn and his kin. And they were met by a friend of Fionn's, a warrior named Fianna. He had been in the Fianna for a time. He'd left on very good terms when he'd decided to come back to Munster, breed horses. And so Fianna insisted on giving Fionn McCool 3 of his horses. Fine, beautiful black horses. 1 for him, 1 for his son, and 1 for his aunt's son, Maclúgad. The horses were stunning. Beautiful creatures, swift and strong and sure. Fionn had a bit of a hesitation on him about it. The Fianna didn't ride horses so much. They certainly didn't ride chariots. Horses were wonderful on a stretch of flat land, but different thing when one was sneaking through the forests. So he wasn't entirely sure how much use they'd get out of these horses. But at the same time, Oisín and Maclúgad were so excited. He thought, he'd keep them for now. Maybe bring them back to Almoon. Maybe get someone to look after them. Maybe they'd come in handy. Well, they would come in handy. now that he thought of it. And so he allowed the enthusiasm of the two young men to carry him. And they found the nearest strand, the longest strand they could. Inch strand. And they rode the horses up and down the strand, racing. Fionn had to admit, there was something to having a horse race. There was something to that speed and that strength. To be a part of it, but not be exerting yourself quite so much. They raced the horses as the tide went out and as the tide went back in. And as much as Fionn had been impressed by their beauty and their speed and their strength, he now had a chance to be impressed by their stamina. But as the sun set, he called a halt to things. Before Oisín and MacLugad could set off again, he pointed out that they needed to find shelter. And then MacLugad pointed up the hill and said, "There's a place. There's a house. We could go in, we could ask for hospitality." And Fionn followed his pointing hand and he saw a strange little house, nestled in among holly trees, with a terrible, cacophonous noise coming from inside it. Now he knew that meant it was something to do with the other world. There was something uncanny about it, but that didn't necessarily hold any fear for him. And certainly it did not hold any fear for his son Oisín, who looked intrigued. And so the three brought their horses to the house in among the holly trees. And they were greeted by a tiny, shrivelled old man, small and stooped and grey. And he grinned up at Fionn McCool with blackened teeth, and he said, "Ah, it's you. It's Fionn McCool. You're welcome. You're very welcome. You and your kin. You and your kin are so welcome to come in here. Oh, we'll give you the hospitality that you deserve, Fionn McCool." And he brought them inside, and he brought their horses to be tethered. And inside, things got stranger still. There was a hag with 3 heads, each more hideous than the last. There was a man beside her with no head. Instead, in his torso was a great staring eye. And one of the hag's heads cried out, "Ah, hospitality, hospitality, the hospitality that you deserve. You must have comfort. Sit down now and make yourselves comfortable. Rest. And Fionn and the others sat, but the benches under them were hard and unforgiving, and it was more comfortable to be standing than sitting on them. And then another of the hag's faces cried out and said, "Oh, but that's not enough. We must have warmth for our guests. We must warm them." And the man with no head picked up a basket full of timber, put it on the fire to build it up. Fionn was glad of that. After all the excitement of the racing, the sweat was drying on him and he could feel the chill creeping in. But the wood was green, and the wood was of the yew tree, and so it sent out thick, black, choking clouds of smoke. Fionn and the others coughed into their hands. The third head of the hag spoke. "Now we must have music. We must have music for our guests." She clapped her hands, and from all around them, where they had not seen before, rose up dead bodies, rotting corpses, with the flesh barely clinging to the bones. And the corpses opened their mouths and began to sing. A hideous sound, a terrifying sound, a wail from beyond the grave. And the little grey man clapped his hands out of time. And the 3 heads of the hag sang a different melody, all out of tune with each other. And the noise was so great that Fionn was hard-pressed not to clap his hands over his ears. and he could see MacLugad about to speak, and he sent him a glare, not to refuse this hospitality. The little grey man was watching them closely, and after a time he called out, "Oh, food, we must have food." The headless man stood up then, took an axe and walked out to where their 3 beautiful Munster horses were tethered. The horses whinnied and shied, tried to get away from the headless man, clearly frightened. But he moved among them, swift and sure. He brought the axe down, one by one, killing their horses, butchering the 3 of them, and walking back into the house with bloody chunks of flesh. Fionn now had a hand on Oisín's arm and a hand on MacLugad's, and he was squeezing them both as tight as he could to keep them from speaking up, from making any objection. He himself was biting his tongue to see their beautiful horses destroyed. But then the old man put those hunks of meat onto sticks, held them in front of the fire for the briefest moment, and presented them to Fionn and Oisín and MacLugad. Fionn did his best to put the raw horse meat into his mouth, for it was still raw. That moment over the smoking fire had done nothing. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. He could not bring himself to swallow the meat of the horse that had just carried him. And so reflexively he spat it out. As soon as he did, their 3 hosts rounded on him. All the joviality was gone from the hag's voice now. She said, "Ah, yes, that's what we'd expect of the captain of the Fianna. That's the kind of behaviour we were waiting for, rejecting our hospitality, is it?" And the little grey man said, "Oh yes, oh yeah, nothing less would we expect from the man who did what you have done." Now Fionn was very sure that he did not recognise these people. And he said so. If he knew them, he'd have recognised them. He would have remembered faces like theirs. But then they told him. They reminded him of Farog. Farog who had come to the Fianna, Farog who had not fit in, Farog who had left. Only the way they told it, it wasn't that he hadn't gotten along with anyone. It was that the rest of the Fianna were so jealous of him that they drove him away, and Fionn McCool did nothing to protect their brother. And not only that, but when he came home, he sickened in grief for being cast out of the Fianna. And after he died of his sickness, their mother mourned and grieved him so greatly that she followed him not long after into death. And the 3 of them, well, they had set their hearts on vengeance. Vengeance against Fionn McCool and his kin. And with that, the 3 attacked. Fionn and Oisín and MacLugad leapt to their feet, grabbed their weapons. They were startled, but they were not unready. They were still men of the Fianna. They fought, and Fionn realised that although they were terrible to look upon, their hosts, Farog's family, they were not fighters in the same way that 3 trained warriors of the Fianna were fighters, and they were not going to last in this fight. And it seemed to him that they came to the same conclusion at the same time, because the hag gave a shriek and the corpses rose up again. The same ones that had sung in that horrible cacophony. They came to the fore and they pressed Fionn, Oisín and MacLugad back. Fionn backed them into a corner, where one could stand in front protecting the other 2 and where they could switch out. And this was what they did, holding off the onslaught, unable to escape, unable to evade, unable to get out in any way, but only holding on. Fionn knew that exhaustion would take them. Fionn knew that before too long they would fall in this horrible, desolate place. Until the sun rose. And at the very moment of the rising of the sun, the walls of that foul house dissolved. The corpses dissolved. The 3 siblings, wounded from their fight with the Fianna, disappeared. And Fionn was left standing with the 2 young men, weapons drawn, staring at nothing at all. The pile of flesh and bone that had been their fine Munster horses was still there, and so the 3 of them turned back to the beach to bathe and to tend their wounds. And on their way back to the Fianna, on foot as they were now, Fionn looked closely at MacLugad.